last hour about the Gita because we have practically finished, but this last chapter of the essays on the Gita is a very fine summary of the whole book, message of the Gita. And it is one of the most inspired writings, though it is short in span, but it is very inspired. And therefore, anyone who wants to get the Gita in a very small compass, the essence of the Gita, so to say, well, if he reads this one chapter, last chapter of the essays on the Gita, well, he will get all that is required if he is an earnest seeker. In fact, if Krishna came and was asked to give his message now to the world, I can't imagine him giving it any other words than the words of this chapter, message of the Gita. If he was asked now to speak his message to the modern world, well, this chapter would be verbatim, I think, his message to the modern world. It is so inspired and so full of the whole quintessence of the Gita is there. Only one has to have the receptivity to get the whole thing in. Only thing is that much of the substance passes over the head when one reads. But if one reads it with that attitude of getting all, well, he needn't read anything of the Gita afterwards. You get the whole thing in. Like that way, it is a wonderful feat of expression in metaphysical poetry and in the literature of the Gita. I think he never cared to show this as a literary piece, you see, and as a performance of on language. But if anybody had only taken up this chapter and spread it wide, 50,000 copies or so, it would have made a mark in the world. It is such a wonderful chapter. You see, the last chapter of the Gita, the message of the Gita. So we'll try to see how it works with our present working of this study session. Gita, relates to karma yoga, yoga of action, yoga in which action finds an important place, indispensable place. Now, here he puts that place of the action in the whole universal scheme and also in the scheme of self-development. He says the secret of action is one with the secret of all life and existence. If you know the secret of the action, well, then you must also know at the same time, you will know the secret of all life and all existence. It is one. Existence is not merely a machinery of nature, a wheel of law in which the soul is entangled for a moment or for ages. It is a constant manifestation of the spirit. Life is not for the sake of life alone, but for God. And the living soul of man is an eternal portion of the Godhead. Action is for self-finding, for self-fulfillment, for self-realization, and not only for its own external and apparent fruits of the moment or the future. Now you see, it is something that gives you in a nutshell the place of action. And here indirectly you can see how far it goes beyond the answer of Gautam Buddha. You see, that man is caught on the wheel of law, karma, and in which he is entangled for the moment or for a long time, but he has to get out of it. You see? If you read between the lines, then you know how far it goes beyond the teaching of one of the greatest incarnations that have worked for the world. You see? Yes. The law, it's not a machinery of law, of nature. That is mechanical operation of some nature which somehow happens to operate, and man is caught in the wheel of law, and then he is entangled and he has to get out of it. Because it's a constant manifestation of the spirit. See the difference? Yes. Life is not for the sake of life alone, but for God. And the living soul of man is an eternal portion of the Godhead. There is a living portion. It is not that it is a soulless movement, a flux of nature, as it was observed once upon a time, and it is a truth of external nature. External nature is a flux. The one who is working the external nature is not a flux. Changing nature was regarded as a great discovery of inner life and truth. That is true, that all is constant change and no stability. The truth given was that all nature, mind, ideas, thoughts, feeling, emotions, desires, they go on changing constantly. There is no permanency about it. There is no entity which is responsible for what happens in the flow or how the flow works. Now here he says, yes, it is true so far as nature is concerned, but there is somebody who is responsible for the nature, who is the origin of nature, who can control the nature, who has given his sanction to this operation of nature and can change this movement of nature into some other rhythm. Now the nature is working on the lower rhythm of ego, desire, and lower life. Well, it is possible for the spirit of which this is the expression to change the rhythm and make the movement on quite a different plane. Then there is a greater secret, that is, action is for self-finding. If one is conscious and aware, all the time he will watch as to who is doing, what he is doing, why he is doing, and he will find himself. He will find that he is nature, an imperfect nature and a very stupid nature perhaps, yes. But then he will find that slowly that behind this there is a self. It is for self-finding, for self-fulfillment and self-realization. And not only for the result, that I am doing this action so that this may happen. That is only secondary. From the point of view of yoga, you see, from the point of view of the eternal and the truth. Then he says, therefore, know then yourself. Know your true self to be God, one with the self of all others. It gives you attitude quite and in an imperative mood of verb, you see. So you need not be in doubt as to what he says. He says as if he is speaking to you. You see. Know then yourself. Know your true self to be God, and one with the self of all others. Know your soul to be a portion of God, and live in what you know. Live in the self. Live in your supreme spiritual nature. Be united with God and God-like. Offer first all your actions as a sacrifice to the highest, and the one in you, and to the highest and one in the world. Deliver last all you are and do into his hands, for the supreme and universal spirit to do through you his own will and the works in the world. This is the solution that I present to you, and in the end you will find there is no other. No prophet had a greater, height of inspiration and that confidence which comes out of experience and concrete realization. You see, this is not spoken in like that. It's not in like intellectual statement. You see, this is that which comes out of experience, solid and concrete. You see. Then one may say, but we don't find this. He says, first, this is a basis of intellect or belief. Either you believe by faith or you understand by intellect the position that he has given. Place of action, meaning of action, significance of action, what you should look to in your actions. Self-finding, self-realization, self-fulfillment, that's all. Yes. And that you are a portion of the Supreme and all are the portions of the Supreme. Yes. Offer the action in the hands of the Supreme. So that's what then you say, but I don't see the Supreme in me. When you start, you don't see. That's why he says, yes. But the consciousness of man is a double kind, is of a double kind, and corresponds to a double truths of existence. There is a double truth of existence, two rhythms of existence, you can say. For there is a truth of inner reality and truth of outer appearance. There are two rhythms working at the same time. Very often I refer to it by saying that, you see, there is an outer government of the world and an inner government of the world. According as he lives in the one or the other, he will be a mind dwelling in human ignorance or a soul founded in divine knowledge. If one lives in inner reality, well, he will be a soul founded on divine knowledge. If he lives in the rhythm of the outer nature, truth of appearance, well, then he will be a mind, mental being dwelling in human ignorance. Lower rhythm, mind governs, and mind is an instrument of ignorance. In the inner rhythm, well, the spirit governs, and the spirit gives you the truth of the real rhythm, that is the inner rhythm at work. You notice the inner rhythm, or you get into the movement of the inner rhythm by withdrawing into the spirit. Man has therefore a double nature, a nature that is subject to ignorance, and inner nature or inner possibility or inner life in which he can be free from the ignorance of nature. In outer appearance, the truth of existence is solely what we call nature. If you observe the working, you will see outer appearance, in its outer appearance, the truth of existence, the whole of existence, if you watch the truth of it, solely what we call nature or prakriti, a force that operates as a whole law, as the whole law and mechanism of being. It is that which creates the world, which is the object of our mind and senses, and creates to the mind. It creates the objective world, it creates the mind. Create the mind, creates to the mind and senses as a means of relation between the creature and the objective world in which he lives. Nature is therefore the truth of the appearance, truth of the outer aspect of the universe. The outer aspect of the nature of the universe seems to be inconscient nature. And this inconscient nature seems to operate mechanically, seems to operate unconsciously, incomplete inconscience. And it is that which creates the objects of the world, objects of sensation, and the mind and senses which receive, perceive, know, be aware of the objects and sensations. You see, the objective world and the so called subjective world of mind and sense is created by this nature. Our mind and our senses are also the result of the same nature which creates the objects on which our mind and senses are working as objects. You see, objective world in which man lives. Man's ego is itself a product of her workings. The sense of I in man is a working of nature. And as is the nature of his ego, so will be the nature of its will. And according to that, he must act and can no other. He is pointing out how man's sense of his being an independent agent, independent subject, is illusory and false. The sense of one's independence, that because, and this is all over the world, all over the world, it is, you see, it is hardly you find an exception. Everybody who has a little mind thinks that his mind is independent, which is absolutely falsehood. It is not true at all. It is nature that is working in him, that's all. You see? But it's very difficult to make somebody understand it, you see? Yes. one thinks that he is an independent agent. Now, this ego is a product of the working of nature. And if the nature is tamasic, full of inertia, idleness, inactivity, well, the ego also will have that nature and will be also tamasic, slow, inert, unconscious, ignorant, habituated to diseases or to habits and addicted to wine or drinking or whatever it is. You see, he will not be able to a conscious agent. If his ego is rajasic, active, dynamic, ambitious, then his whole nature will partake of that movement of the ego, which is a product of nature. Ego is on the linchpin, as we said yesterday or today morning, I don't know when. It is only a pin on which our nature puts all the actions in order to coordinate them, in order to give them a sense of, organization, keep the entity intact. Because if it is spread out like that without some organizing or integrating agency, however ignorant it may be, still it integrates the working of nature. Otherwise, one part of nature will do something which the other part doesn't know. And that actually happens in the case of persons who have no organized entity. He does in his vital being something which his mind doesn't know. There are people who actually have double trouble or fourfold personality, where you don't find any coordination. There, the ego is not sufficiently forward to organize the whole nature. But in normal cases, this ego is performing a useful function for ignorance. But ego is not an independent agent. What he's trying to make out is that when one is convinced of himself and his ego as an independent, responsible, agent in nature or in life or in action, well, he is only acting under illusion, because this ego itself is a product of nature. And the type of ego will dictate the type of nature that he will have and type of will that he will have. Well, the whole determination of what one will be is decided by the nature. Man is only an agent, well, in the workshop of nature. The sense of freedom also being one of the excuses which nature offers to the individual to be her agent. It is offered to man in order to carry out her purpose. When her purpose is served, the same ego is not able to do anything that it likes. Take a man, a very great man if you like, who has led big movements of the world. For 10 years, you find at the top everything is going on and his word is law, and what he says, you are surprised how, see what a great man, he governs people, people obey and do. And the purpose is served, the same man gives order and nothing happens. He gives leadership, nothing happens. Nature has finished. It is like a mango that is sucked dry, and now only the stone remains and you are put aside. The sense of ego is only an excuse. At that time, if he understands that this is nature, well, he's saved, because there is no reaction. He knows that he is not acting. Well, that would be only a yogi. You see, one who has done the yoga. He may move mountains, but he knows that it is not he who is moving it. He knows it fully well when he does the action. Well, there you find the exception, one in 1,000 perhaps, who has that wisdom or inner, vision to know that it is only nature getting the work done through the agency of the ego, and allow that to happen if you know that it is not you who are doing. In this inner reality, now this is external reality. Now do you take the inner reality? In the inner reality, the truth of existence is no longer nature. Go inside and you find that nature is not the final reality. The truth of existence, of being, truth of life, truth of man's, the truth of the whole world is not external at all, not nature, but soul and spirit. You find that the self is the real truth of inner existence. Purusha, that is to say, rather than Prakriti, nature. Nature or self is only a power of the spirit when you go inside. When you go inside, then you find that nature is a power of the self, power of the Purusha, power of the soul. She is the force of Purusha. force of self, force of being. So that makes you third or fourth position clear. And then our nature is our soul's manifestation. It operates by its sanction and embodies its secret self knowledge and self consciousness and its will of being in her motions and forms and changes. Our nature is that which our inner soul expresses. Now, ignorantly, if you go into the inner life, then conscious, and then the rhythm will change. The real soul and self in us is hidden. It is hidden from our intelligence, that is our mind, by its ignorance of inner things. Mind is ignorant of inner things because mind is turned outwards and it is engaged in acquiring knowledge of the outside world by use of sensation, by observation, by thinking, by comparing, by all processes which depend upon the outer evidence. It is therefore ignorant of the inner being, inner things, by a false identification. How is the inner world or inner being secret from mind and intelligence? First, because the intelligence is not turned inwards. Secondly, because mind, life, and body subject themselves to a false identification. It says, I am the mind, I am the life, I am the idea, I am the impulse, or I am the emotion, I am the body. That is false identification. That restricts the experience of the inner being. One is not able to go inside and find out what one really is. The real soul and self in us is hidden from our intelligence by its ignorance of inner things, by a false identification, by an absorption in our outward mechanism of mind, the life, and body. Constantly, the whole of the being, egoistic being, is absorbed in mental activity, in vital activity, in physical activity. Therefore, it doesn't get the knowledge of the inner being, the inner world, the inner truth. Extroversion, false identification, and complete absorption in external mental, vital, or physical activity. That is why the inner world is not, one is not aware of the inner world and its working. Now he says that a change can be brought about in this condition where the intelligence and mind is not aware of the inner spirit, truth of existence, the inner truth. The inner reality is not known. Reality of the self, reality that is at the back of true action. Because of this causes that he gave. Now, if a withdrawal can be effected from identification with the nature, of which man is quite capable, if the absorption can be resolved and one removes his attention from absorption and doesn't allow the whole of his concentration of consciousness to be completely occupied with mind, ideas, emotions, desires, impulses, bodily functions, then it is possible for him to withdraw. A withdrawal from this activity, this identification, and this absorption is possible. And then that would bring about a great change. And the change would be a very, very radical change if one succeeds in doing it. You see? First, the change wouldn't be outside, but a change of attitude. You see, all real change is inner change first. Outer change is only a working out and result of the inner change. And this change would be change of attitude. You might do the same thing, but your attitude towards it will be so radically different that you cannot say you are doing the same thing. Though apparently and physically or outwardly, you might be doing the same thing. It ceases to be the same. And he says that this change is not for all and sundry. You see, this change is, the elect are called, he says in this essay. I call the elect to try this change. It is not meant for the masses, you see. Masses can have some idea which they can try to assimilate and work upon and grow a little more conscious. This is for the elect, he says. I call the elect to effect this change in themselves. The change from the outer rhythm of nature to the inner truth of existence, which is the working out of the spirit. And spirit working as originator, as a dictator or the Lord or the master of nature. Because he says, for that there will be needed a complete consecration of yourself. If you want to effect this change, you will have, for that will be needed a complete consecration of yourself and your nature and your life to the highest and to nothing but the highest. Nothing accepted except as it is in God and a form of God and for the sake of the divine. That will be the change needed. And it is such a radical change that it is only can be effected by the elect. I think it's quite right. In a certain sense, elect means not great elect. Great is anybody is elect who chooses the divine. In one of his great writings in yoga, I think he said, you see, how to know that you are chosen by the divine? So he says, he who chooses the divine has been chosen by the divine. The most wonderful thing he said. He who chooses the divine has been chosen by the divine. That is the sign of being elect. Elect him, that's it. That's why I say God is the greatest democrat. It was not as light as it appeared to be. But it will need a complete consecration of yourself and your nature and your life to the highest and nothing but the highest. Nothing accepted except as it is in God, a form of God, or for the sake of the divine, for the sake of God. Well, that will be the attitude. Now, this attitude is written in 3 lines, but it might require 30 years. So that it's not a question of, what is to be done, question is of the process. You say that, oh, if you put milk on the pot and if you raise this temperature to this boiling point, milk will boil. Yes, but then you require milk, you require heat, you require to attend to it, and then to see that the boiling point comes. Yeah, that's it. So this is a command. This is sort of a timetable. This priority, he first says, in your timetable, can you give priority to these things? Then you are elect, isn't it? It is very clearly says that there will be needed. So, are you prepared to fulfill the need? A complete consecration and of your nature and self and to the highest, and an attitude in which you look upon the whole world as a manifestation of a supreme reality and everything happening under a divine guidance. That attitude will have to be fixed somewhere. Mind, it may be heart, it may be willpower, in not at once all through and all the time, but in one part as a constant, powerful reminder. And you go on insisting upon it so that it becomes constant. One forgets in the beginning, well, restores it afterwards, again forgets, it rises again. It's like a child falling down and getting up and walking, trying to walk. Well, a child doesn't walk on the first day, but it works ultimately. So, in the same way, in the inner life, the process of sadhana or yoga, you do not succeed on the first day. The attitude appeals to one and says, this is right. But there is a story, you see. There was a soldier who wanted, tattooing? Yes, he wanted a lion to be tattooed on his hand. So he went to the man and said that I want a lion. Yes, then he began pricking. And it was pricking. So he said, what are you doing? And he said, I am putting the tail of the lion. I begin with the tail. Oh, you don't know, modern fashion is to have tailless lions. All right. You want lion? Yes, I want lion. So he began to prick. Then he said, what are you doing? He said, I begin on the head. I put the ear of the lion. You see, they begin with the ear and then go down and prepare. Oh, he said, nowadays even the dogs cut off their ears, the modern style is. That fellow said, sir, you won't have the lion. He say, whatever I do, it will prick you. Whatever I do, it is going to prick you. So, in the process of yoga, it is like that tattooing of the lion, you see. It is going to prick somewhere in nature. And one has to say, yes, this is necessary. Yes, that's it. One has to say, well, unless you get this stupid thing out, it will not work. So you have to say, well, it may take time, but there it is. It has to be there. Now, and for that, all the instruments have to be ready. You see, it is not only one part or one desired or temporary or momentary impulse that can bring this about. All the instruments, including the intellect, the emotional being, the willpower, and they must consent. If not one day, yes, ultimately, but somewhere a powerful consent must be secured in nature part. Otherwise, one part is going one way, another is going another way. You see, east, west, south, north, and one is divided up, and there is no coordination. And then he says that you say that to the highest. Now, what is this highest? So he gives you conception of the highest. Who is the highest to whom you have to consecrate yourself and your nature and everything, and look upon his presence in you and in everything else and in all actions and in all beings? The Supreme is the one, eternal beyond time and space, an impersonal eternal, if you like, immutable spirit, a self, calm, limitless, equal in the sense of equality. It is also nature, only there he is behind. It is also nature. He is the inhabitant of what we feel as nature. You have also an impersonal self in you. So there is an eternal, an immutable, an inhabitant of everything, and an impersonal self. All these are aspects of one divine reality or one divine being. And then he now puts a good note so as to give a complete picture without any important part missing. But God in the world and you in the world are also real. Not only the eternal one and the timeless, not only the impersonal, immutable, and the self only, one who is present as an inhabitant behind the appearance of nature, no, that only, but God in the world and you in the world are realities. They are not appearances. So the divine is in the world, and you are in the world, and God is real in the world. Your existence in the world also is real. It's not temporary, phenomenal, passing, evanescent, something which has no ultimate basis in anything real. You see? The world and you are true. And actual powers and manifestation of the Supreme. That's what Gita says in 4 chapters, isn't it? 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. Vibhuti Yoga, the divine in the presence of the divine in its various manifestations, yes. The world and you are true and actual powers and manifestation of the Supreme. Therefore, accept life. Accept life and action. And do not reject them. He's summarizing Gita, remember. You will see you can at once go to verse of the Gita and say, yes, yes, yes. It is one chapter, half a chapter, 4 verses, 10 verses, but put in one sentence, you see. Therefore, accept life and action and do not reject them. One with God in your impersonal self and in your essence. An eternal portion of the Godhead, turn to Him by the love and adoration of your spiritual personality. for its own infinite, make of your natural being what it is intended to be, an instrument of works, a channel, a power of the divine. It is very nice in the sense that it is imperative mood. I like it for that. You see? So you can't miss the import. If you go into Gita, it is in the midst of metaphysical clarity. If you have a mind that can grasp it, it's all right. It is there also completely in a very fine way. But here it comes in a way in which the most prosaic man can get it. When he says, I want to know, but he says, I can give you command. You want. You say, oh, Sishyasteham sadhimam tam prapannam. In Gita, Arjuna says, I am the disciple, give me your command. Well, here he is ready to give command. And a command is more easily understood by a prosaic and modern mind than an intellectual or metaphysical, exposition in which you get round and say, oh, but this is yoga, and then this is Sankhya, and this is Purusha, and this is Prakriti, and this is immutable, this is mutable, this is Supreme, Purushottama. Oh, I get lost in the forest. But here he clearly says, yes, what do you want to do? He says, all right, you want command? Give you command. What is intended of you? An instrument of works, a channel, a power of the divine. Be ready to do that. He says, but God, if God is present, He is working. He says, yes, of course He is working. If say all is God, then God is actually working. He says, yes, of course it is working. And then the truth is that man is, whole nature is doing, and man is doing that divine work unconsciously and imperfectly through the lower nature. That is all that is happening. Man is obeying some command of the omnipotent, but he is doing it unconsciously. So he thinks he is doing, and in doing he gets all the reaction because he thinks he is. You see egoism, and then he does it with motives which are also from his desire and from his impulse and from his emotions and so on. So it is imperfectly done, unconsciously done, imperfectly done, and done through lower nature. The agency through which happens is a lower agency. If a royal command passes through and is not executed by the right authority, well, it is a royal command, but it gets very much mixed up in its operation, its execution. Well, the same is happening in the world. It disfigures the divine by the ego. Everything is disfigured by the ego. Things are coming from the divine, but they get a complete disfigurement. Then I quote from him, you see. The Supreme has manifested the world from his spiritual essence and in his own infinite existence. The Supreme has manifested the world from his spiritual essence. He is the material cause, he is the creating cause. And in his own infinite existence, it is within him. Just as a poet creates a poetry within his own self. Infinite existence, and manifested himself too variously in the world, in multiple forms, in multiple statuses. All things are his powers and figures. And to the powers and figures of him, there is no end. This is from Gita's one verse, you see. Of my vibhuti, there is nastyanto vistarasya me. There is no end to my extension of my glory, something like that, you see. There is no end because he himself is infinite. There are always these three eternal states of the divine being. This we have done in the Life Divine, so you won't find it difficult. But in Gita, he puts it in the form in which we can get now here. In the Life Divine, we have done this. There are always these three eternal states of the divine being. Status, if you like, states. There is always and forever this one eternal, immutable self-existence, which is the basis and support of all existent things. There is always and forever this spirit mutable in nature, basis of individual expression. Individual mutable nature manifested by her, means by nature, as all these existences. There is always and forever this transcendent divine who can be both these others at once. It can be pure silent spirit and at the same time active soul and life of the cycles of the universe. Because he is something other and more than these two, the individual and the cosmic, the basis of the individual and the cosmic, whether taken separately or together. In us is the Jiva. Jiva is the spirit of this spirit, the flame of this divine entity, a conscious power of the Supreme. In us is this portion of the Supreme, a conscious power of the Supreme. Power of the Supreme that is conscious, conscious of his identity with the Supreme. Now, there he has made the points clear. The transcendent, the universal, the individual, and in the universal, an immutable and dynamic universal. That was clear. And in the individual, a divine center, a cosmic, a supreme consciousness, which is conscious power of the Supreme. Nature alone acts and works out her mechanical figures, but the pure spirit is silent, inactive, and free. This is the beginning of the Purusha consciousness. You see, we have dealt with this in the yoga also and in Gita, but here he gives it, in an order which comes an order of practice of yoga almost. And this realization that nature alone works, but the pure spirit is silent, inactive, and free, this brings about a calm and equality, a peace and freedom. When you realize that spirit is silent and inactive and free, the nature also becomes calm and equal, calm and equality, peace and freedom. But what is lacking in this realization is dynamic divinity. You do not realize your identity with the dynamic divine. You realize the freedom of the silent spirit, the equanimity, the calm, and the freedom and the peace. Now, he would say that that is the basis. In order to go further in yoga, this is only one step of the yoga, one of the steps. In order to go further, you have to aspire for a dynamic divinity, a dynamic movement in which one is identified with the divine. Therefore, I quote from him now, a perfect perfection comes only by living in the supreme and the whole divine. This aspect of freedom, aspect of impersonality, of silence, inactivity, is one aspect of the divine. It's not the whole of the divine. Therefore, he says that a still greater perfection can come by identification with the whole of the divine. All henceforth is his conscious sight and sense, the will and working of the divine. When you realize that the whole existence is a dynamic working of a divine consciousness, then his conscious sight and sense, the will and working of the divine. He lives and acts as a soul and portion of the universal consciousness and power. Then the individual is filled with the transcendent divine delight, a spiritual ananda. His action becomes the divine action, and his status the highest spiritual status. When he can realize and identify himself with the dynamic divine in life, then his identification with the divine being and divine nature both becomes complete, so that in the self and in the nature part, he becomes completely identified with the divine self and divine nature. That is the highest status of spiritual perfection. Then he points out what are the difficulties. This is the perfection. You see, rising from surrendering the action as a sacrifice, you rise to the impersonality, know the external and the inner nature, and retire into the inner nature by withdrawal. And in the withdrawal, you realize the impersonal self, and the impersonal self silent, inactive, and free. Therefore, the nature will become equal and calm and peaceful and perfect in the withdrawal. But is one step further is identification with the dynamic divine consciousness. When that dynamic identification is done, then you get the active delight or dynamic identification with the supreme. See that? But that is not without difficulties. So now he points out what are the difficulties when you try. And there, in this further passage, desire brings always confusion of mind. What comes in the way of establishing all this practice by withdrawal and so on, you see, for surrender to the divine and great consecration, getting into the inner rhythm from the external rhythm of appearance to go into the inner rhythm of truth. Desire brings always confusion of mind and limitation of will. An egoistic and distorted view of things. A failure and clouding of knowledge. This is what desire does to the man. Apart from its being not capable of being satisfied, the thing that it does in the realm of knowledge is that it simply clouds the consciousness, gives a distorted view, failure and clouding of knowledge. And that is, I think I pointed out to the people at the art barn when I talked that when you look at the world through the spectacles of desire, you see it quite differently. When desire drops off, you see the world quite differently, the same world. That doesn't change. Some change has taken place here. In the world of art, I was pointing out that time if you were there. You see that in the world of art, desire is put aside for the time being. That's why the vision of the world is quite different of the same objective world. It reveals its another aspect which is missed because one looks at it through the spectacles of desire, and desire gives its own color to everything, and therefore distorts the whole view and clouds the knowledge and confusion of mind, doesn't allow one to think clearly. When there is a strong desire, one is not able to think clearly. So that is one difficulty. Desire in its preferences and violences are the first strong root of sin and error. So there you find how Buddha and Sherunda are in perfect agreement. You see that yes, Trishna must be given up. Now there you find complete oneness of of the way and the philosophical outlook. You see, root of sin and error. Desire is the chief enemy of spiritual perfection. So that has to be abandoned. That has to be rejected from nature. Gita says, Jahi Shatrum Mahabaho Kamarupam Dirasadam. Of this is a quintessential expression. Kill this enemy, desire, that is the enemy of man's knowledge. You see? Sri Krishna says to Arjuna, kill this enemy. You see? It is very difficult to be killed, but kill this enemy, desire, who is the enemy of all true knowledge. Well, he has summed up here by saying, desire in its preferences and violences are the first strong root of sin and error. Desire is the chief enemy of spiritual perfection. That has to be thrown. Then he gives order. Now, if you take the order, there is a commander who gives you order. Slay then desire. It's an imperative mood. Slay then desire. Put away attachment to possessions and enjoyment of the outwardness of things. Separate yourself from all that comes to you as outward touches and solicitations, as objects of the mind and senses. They come when they come, this is for the mind, this is for the sense. It's not for self. This refers to somebody in the other office and not to the true self. So you say, don't come here. You refer to the other department and don't disturb here. Yes. outward touches and solicitations as objects of mind and senses. Let there be a calm indifference to these things and to all the objects of desire in all your nature. Look on them with tranquil regard of an impersonal spirit. So, as you look at somebody else's desires almost or impulses, you look at them. You don't get any disturbance. Disturbance is only restricted to nature. Where anything, impulse, desire, or anything comes, it is that part is disturbed. But where it appeals for sanction, it is perfect calm. Now, as a result of this, what will happen is that equality will be established, is it not? Nature will become full of samatha, equality, unmoved by success or failure, pleasure or pain, praise or blame, or, you know. It will be equality to all happenings, whatever happens, to all persons, good, wicked, bad, indifferent, and so on, friend, enemy, equal regard. And then one may say that perhaps when that equality and this detachment comes, there will be no action. So the Gita has answered that, but he is putting it in a ladder of the form here in the message, you see. Action will still be done in you. When you have withdrawn and when you have become impersonal, when you have a regard which looks upon this desire and everything coming in you as if it is not yours and so on, equal temperament, equality established in the nature part, action will still be done in you because nature always is at work. But you must learn and feel that yourself is not the doer of the action. Observe simply, observe unmoved the working of nature. Observe simply, not take part in it, that is to say. And observe unmoved the working of nature and the play of qualities, means inertia, activity, and balance, and the magic of the gunas, the three qualities. Observe also unmoved the action in yourself, outside and in you. Observe unmoved the action of these things in yourself. Look on all that is going around you, and see that it is the same working in others. It's the same nature working in others. Isn't it? Man, when he gets his egoistic idea or impulse, he thinks it is my in a special personal sense of the term, but he doesn't know. Thousands have that. Is it not at the same time, perhaps? It's nobody's property. It's still man always. You see how wrong is the deception that nature practices on man can be seen at once by the false sense of individual possession of ideas, thoughts, impulses, movements of nature. It's all over. And this practice gives you the way to get at the central truth of this thing. Yes. Observe and move the action in yourself. And look on all that is going around you and see that it is the same working in others. Observe that the result of your works and theirs is constantly other than you or they desired or intended. It doesn't come. You make for one and something else comes. You say this and not that, but some other thing. Not theirs, not yours, but omnipotently fixed by a greater power that wills and acts here in universal nature. The result is decided by a greater power that is working in the universal movement. Therefore, you get a conviction now. When this realization or this practice is established, then you know that the will that works in the nature part is nature's will and not one's own. Is it not? That's clear. And it is not the ego's will that is working. It doesn't get the result, first of all, that is intended or desired, first of all. And it's nature that is working through one of the gunas, one of the qualities and powers, you see, one of the instruments. Therefore he says, now, draw back from the external formation of your inner silent self to your inner silent self. So, formation of nature is there: mind, emotional being, vital being, nervous being, physical being. Draw back. Draw back from external formation to your inner silent self. You will see that you, the Purusha, are inactive. The subject is self. You are inactive. But nature continues to do always her works according to her gunas, qualities. Fix yourself in this inner inactivity and stillness. Fix yourself in this inner inactivity and stillness. No longer regard yourself as the doer, because nature is doing this. Remain seated in yourself above the play, free from perturbed action of the qualities of nature. Live secure, secure in the purity of an impersonal spirit. Live untroubled by the mortal waves that persist in your members, in your nature. And then, in that silent, inactive consciousness, you will know the divine who is the eternal. In that inner movement of withdrawal, you will know God, and you will know yourself as the immortal, identified with the divine. Dateless existence, you will know that you are not one who is born and who is going to die. Independent of mind, independent of all life, independent of all body. This is only taken up for work. It is there. It is not that it is thrown, but you know that it is not self. Yes. And into this eternity of the silent self, rejecting from your mind all seed of thought and all root of desire from the vital being, rejecting the figure of birth in the body, you can pass at your end by concentration in the pure eternal and a mighty transference of your consciousness to the eternal and the absolute. This you can do. And then this is a great possibility. This is from Gita. Remember, I can point out to you which verses are, put here in a nutshell. At the end of human existence, when one leaves the body, he generally goes into that plane of consciousness where constantly his consciousness has been dwelling in life. You cannot all of a sudden to get into a higher consciousness at the time of leaving the body. A constant preoccupation with things in life will be dominant at the time of leaving the body in 9 cases out of 10. You see, if a man has been subject to desire, well, he will not suddenly become independent of desire when he's leaving the body. Naturally, he will have so many unfulfilled desires and he will be feeling rather restless that he has not been able to fulfill all his desires. So when he leaves the body, he gets into the vital world of desire. You see, and the vital world also has many levels, but he will get into that level of the vital world where impulses and desires are the dominant rule, you see, and the powers and forces. And he will have to pass through that before he gets into his psychic being. Now, Gita says at one point that when you have identified yourself with the silent, omnipresent reality, then at the time of leaving the body, you retire into that and your whole substance merges into the eternal and the infinite. There is nothing in between. Because you have known that mind was taken up for a certain purpose and used by the universal force for some work that was intended. You had nothing to do with it, you see. It is not you, X, Y, or Z who did something, but some intention of the universal or omnipresent reality created a mold in nature for carrying out some work. And that was carried out. That's all. There was nothing personal about that, you see. Well, when that conviction and experience or realization is there, Then he says at the time of leaving the body, you identify with the infinite and the eternal. But this is also not the whole of the yoga, says the Gita. Now he says he's taking one by one further up. The ladder is not complete, you see. And because the divine is a worker within you, add the knowledge of the Supreme who is silent and also who is the dynamic spirit. The divine is silent, withdrawn and inactive. At the same time, the most dynamic worker in the world. So he says, which you identify yourself with the total being of the divine, then all works are his because he is the Lord. He is above all works, free. And not only that, he descends into human birth as an incarnation. He takes up human limitations. The divine is so dynamic in the movement of working in the cosmos that even condescends to come down into human body. If you want a more proof for the dynamic aspect of the divine, he says, look at why should he incarnate? Isn't it? That is one of the strongest arguments in Shankar's Mayavad, you see. They couldn't answer, they never were able to answer. If the world is illusion, why should the divine come in the world to confirm the illusion? Does he come to deceive people and say, oh, be more and more into this deception? He always comes to give a dharma, to give a law of life. He doesn't come to say life is nothing. No incarnation can do that. Because that is the law of the very function of the divine is a dynamic movement leading ultimately to a divine truth, not to a unreality or to an illusion. Now here it says that he's come here as an incarnation, and in fact he is here because the world is here. He is here because he is descended. Apart from an incarnation, the world itself is his manifestation. You too must do the works as he does, centering yourself in him. That is the action of the liberated yogi. Not only a yogi, but a liberated yogi. Therefore, he puts down now the first step, therefore, is to put from you attachment to the fruit of your actions, recompense, and to labor only for the sake of the work itself that has to be done for the divine. That's the first step to identify with the dynamic aspect. Make of all you do, from the greatest and the most unusual effort to the smallest daily act. Make of each act of your mind, each act of your heart, each act of your body, of every inner and outer turn, of every thought, will and feeling, of every step and pause and movement, a sacrifice to the master of all sacrifice, the master of all tapasya, spiritual, effort. Well, second, attachment to the fruit, freedom from that, and action done as sacrifice to the master of all works. It is the divine infinite that is being progressively fulfilled in your nature. Then you will see that it is not your fulfillment, the divine fulfillment in your nature. It is the supreme power to be. It is the Shakti, the power of the Lord that shapes and takes shape in your nature, Swabhava. Give up then all sense that you are the doer. See the eternal alone as the doer of action. Since action is the nature of embodied spirit, since works are the will of the eternal worker, the great spirits, the master minds, should set the example. World workers, should they be? They must be workers of the world. World workers should they be, doing all works of the world without reservation. God workers, free, glad, desireless, liberated souls and nature. In the last passage, Then you will be released from all laws of conduct, liberated from all dharmas. The divine power and presence within you will free you from sin and evil and lift you far above human standards of virtue. For you will live and act in the absolute and spontaneous right and purity of spiritual being and divine nature. The divine and not you will enact your will and works through you, not for your lower personal pleasure and desire, but for the world purpose and for your divine good and the manifest or secret good of all. There is one. This will be your perfection in the world and body. And beyond these worlds of temporal birth and supreme eternal superconsciousness will be yours. And you will dwell forever in the highest status of the Supreme Spirit. Cycles of incarnation and the fear of mortality will not distress you. For here in life you will have accomplished the expression of the Godhead, and your soul, even though it has descended into mind and body, will already be living in the vast eternity of the Spirit. This then is the supreme movement, this complete surrender of your whole self and nature, this abandonment of all dharmas, his laws of action, to the divine, who is your highest self, and this absolute aspiration of your members to the supreme spiritual nature. If you can once achieve it, whether at the outset or much later on the way, then whatever you are and you were in your outer nature, your way is sure and your perfection inevitable. A supreme presence within you will take up your yoga, carry it swiftly along the lines of your swabhava, the nature, to its consummate completion. And afterwards, whatever your way of life and mode of action, you will be consciously living, acting, and moving in Him. And the divine power will act through you in your every inner and outer motion. This is the supreme way because it is the highest secret and mystery, and yet an inner movement progressively realizable by all. This is the deepest, the most intimate truth of your real, your spiritual existence. You read it on those beautiful Purani diet ever. Then world will never see its wonders. The greatest miracles are always kept back because they are miracles.
Of the
Yes. Yes.
would it be possible for, since this is written, the copy they wanted?
We are trying to, we don't know, but we are trying to bring it out. Want to.
It will
Because
be.
some ideas of central ideas of Sri Aurobindo is life divine or essays or some collective life and so on, put in one form will be good for somebody who wants to get a little introduction and smattering about it. It's not that it is everything, but just some taste.
Very modest.
Yes, it is like a man just trying to get into the ocean before the thing throws him down.
It's not kidding.
Say, if you can go down like that and say, no, it's nice, it's very nice, yes, I know. Then you go, then you see, tell me, I don't tell them anything because it's not good to say. That's also work of the divine, as you know. But when they say, I was surprised that, you see, repeat the mantra and you go like that and so on. What mantra? You have to change your whole nature, my dear boy. I say in my mind. It's not so simple as all that. But so, yes. If you are interested in it, all right, do it. Because something is better than nothing. This is a question of whole humanity and how human being is going to fulfill himself in the divine. And what is the conception of the divine? And how is it going to work in the individual? How is it going to work in the collectivity? How is it going to work in a movement of culture? What is going to happen to literature, to art, to poetry? You see, to social reconstruction. Well, if that is not met, how is a solution given? The solution is a solution in which all the difficulties of man or the problems that man is facing today Well, some way is shown to him out, some way out, and a way in which he utterly, ultimately meets the spirit, meets the divine. There are thousands of ideas of perfection now in the world, economic perfection and intellectual perfection and all kinds of perfections are there already. People are there making effort. All that is making up for us ultimate some perfection. But here he points out the total, complete idea of a perfection in which everything finds a place. Better you will find his own philosophy if you want to know how to read.
Well, I didn't know how to read it. I didn't have anything
One
else.
letter of his will reveal to you his philosophy if you know that he wouldn't have written this but for that idea in his life divine and so on. At once you can trace. Gita is nothing else but a preliminary to life divine. If you understand the essence of Gita, you more easily get into life divine. Takes the Gita as the text and comments, you see. That's why a little sort of apparent restriction, but throughout he's working out that basis. He's putting it in and showing that Krishna wanted to say the same thing.
Well, but the philosophy,
Krishna of the Gita.
well, I have about
Yes.
6 or 7 different interpretations.
Experience. Intellectual, you can always comment and this and that, it's all right. Something that somebody has done. Now this is the message of the Gita. No commentator can come 100 miles near that. You can take the text and say, Krishna said this is a... But if Krishna came, what would he have said? Well, only this he could have said. There is no comparison.
Our nature is our soul manifestation.
Yes, yes. And according to the nature of the ego, will be the manifestation of the soul. So if the soul is identified with the lower rhythm, the expression will be that. If the soul is identified with the inner rhythm, the expression will be divine. Now the manifestation is distorted, unconscious. Yes, of course it is. That is just lower, you'll see after 2 paragraphs, that explanation is there. That at present it is unconscious working of the divine purpose, distorted working also, and wrong image of the whole thing.
But it's still working on soul.
Yes, it is working of the divine.
Yes.
Yeah. And soul in the lower rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Ourself in the lower rhythm. There are 2 rhythms, lower nature and higher nature. Vidya Prakriti, Avidya Prakriti. Parashakti, Aparashakti. You see? So it is working in the lower rhythm, and there the nature itself is the drive, and no individual initiation or independent action is possible. It's all under nature's guidance. The self is not free, and when the self withdraws, then you get into the upper rhythm, where the soul is free and the nature then is transformed and expresses that which the soul molds into a mold and make it express. That is the difference. And works to the higher rhythm. Now also divine works to double rhythm, the rhythm of ignorance and rhythm of the higher nature, even now. So it is possible to get into that divine rhythm and identify divine nature and divine self. So a double identity of self and nature. Self with the divine self, nature with the divine nature. This perfection and freedom before Sri Aurobindo never had clearly, nobody had clearly defined and understood.
No.
There was always the freedom of the soul insisted upon. Nature was always relegated to imperfection. They always said nature can never be perfect. And that in an integral conception of freedom, nature must have claim to freedom, because nature is the power of the divine. That's it. Apartment, you can't baffle Sri Aurobindo's outlook. They can't. You can make them feel that it has its cogency and its rationality and its, you see, it's a clear logic.
Well, the lesson you gave tonight about being in the book too.
Oh, if the book comes, it will sure to be there, isn't it?
Well, the book will have.
My adopted daughter has a great grudge for, you see, that all that I speak on Savitri is not recorded. I do it every twice a week there. You see, and that for 1 year or 2 years it goes on. And her greatest every time she comes, but we must have I said, yes, there is no hurry. What is there? What we do is in the air, it is here. Nothing is gone, nothing is destroyed. No, but this is I don't know. It is like that.
Well,
That is
can't we
life.
send her, transcriptions of the?
You must have.
He means what he's done in front of Jerry, she regrets it, it has.
I know, but.
That is telling the whole text from first to the last like that, you see, and 1 hour, 2 lines, 1 hour, 10 lines, 1 hour, 15 lines. It is madness, they will say. Anybody else would say this man has no common sense.
For the girl, the one that on solid.
Yeah, that is all right. That is nothing. No, her idea was that a complete exposition from, canto to canto being kept like that. Of course, because so many other things come in. You see, Savitri is a world and universe. So when you get into it, you don't know how to come out of it. Come with me, then they also like that this is, oh yeah, this is good, but it's all right, you enjoy. Finished. That's the finished.